أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى وسلم على سيدنا محمد سيدنا وسندنا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذرياته وأهل بيته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Alhamdulillah, we continue with our remedial kalam series, moving through the text of the Murshid al-Mu'in of Abdul Wahid ibn ʿāshir rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, a'la Allahu darajatihi, ameen. And so in the previous lesson we talked about those attributes that a person must know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their pondering over the signs of God in His creation, that are rationally necessary for Him, those attributes that are rationally impossible for Him, and those attributes that are possible for Him, rationally speaking. And now the next lesson, the next section of this module on Aqidah is discussing what the proofs are for those 13 attributes. Why the necessary ones are necessary, why the impossible ones are impossible, and why the possible ones are possible. So go ahead and read the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines.
What is that end up?
وجوده له دليل قاطع.
Or should I finish off?
Read the next 10 lines. So وجوده له دليل قاطع, that in 10 lines.
وجوده له دليل قاطع حاجة كل محدث للصانع لو حدثت لنفسها الأكوان لاجتمع التساوي والرجحان وذا محال وحدوث العالم من حدث الأعراض مع تلازم لو لم يكن القدم وصفه لزم حدوثه دور تسلسل حتم لو أمكن الفناء لانتفى القدم لو ماثل الخلق حدوثه انحتم لو لم يكن وصف الغنى له افتقر لو لم يكن بواحد لما قدر لو لم يكن حيا مريدا عالما وقادرا لما رأيت عالما والتالي في الست القضايا باطل قطعا مقدم إذا مماثل والسمع والبصر والكلام بالنقل مع كماله ترام لو استحال ممكن أو وجب قلب الحقائق لزما أوجبا.
Alright, barakallahu fikum. So this lesson is kind of like the fruit of the tree that we planted in the subsequent lessons. It really is beautiful. It has a lot of decisive reasoning that is delivered very briefly, in some sense in a deceptively brief format, but it comes with a lot of power and a lot of strength, intellectually speaking. So the first line we read is وجوده له دليل قاطع حاجة كل محدث للصانع لو حدثت لنفسها الأكوان لاجتمع التساوي والرجحان وذا محال. And so he's saying that Allah Ta'ala's wujud, right? From the 13 sifat, the first of them that we mentioned was what? Is wujud, Allah's existence, that He exists. That His existence has a decisive proof. Which is the need of all ephemeral things for a causal agent. Everything in the world of causes and effects has an agent that requires it to exist. Everything within time and space is within the world of causes and effects. It has something that requires it to exist. And that causal agent is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this has to do with the reasoning of something that I think is lost on a lot of people, which is that people say, well, if God created everything, then who created God? And we say that cause and effects, because we negate the existence of an infinity in the past or in the future at all in any real quantifiable sense, we say that time must have a finite beginning. And that finite beginning cannot itself be part of time, otherwise time has existed forever. And so we say that all things that are within the realm of time and space need to have some sort of beginning And that beginning is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One thing must have created all things. There's one primal cause for all things. You cannot just keep kicking the can backwards down the river. Again, to repeat myself. Now, interesting. When you do math, for example, we don't accept this type of reasoning. That, for example, dividing something by 0, it doesn't yield you any sort of real answer. It's not, because there's the idea that, imagine if you divide something by 0, what result will you get? There's no result, right? One might theorize that the result of dividing something by 0 is infinity. But you really don't get any useful result. Certain things have useful results. For example, the square root of -1 has a useful result. They call it I. But you can work through that in order to, even though I is not something that you can show, empirically, but you can work through that, the square root of -1, in order to get to a place later on where it actually has a useful result. Dividing by 0 has no useful result. Dividing by infinity, or any result that has any sort of infinity in it, also doesn't have any sort of useful result. So for example, anyone who's taken calculus before, they know, for example, when you take limits, one of the ways you know that you've taken a limit incorrectly is when you have like a fraction of 5 infinity over 8 infinity. You can't cancel the infinities out and turn the answer into 5/8, right? What is 5 times infinity anyway? Is it any different than 4 times infinity? Absolutely not. And so your result is completely useless. It means that you need to work the problem a different way. When you get to that point, you know that you did the problem wrong. Why is it in math? It seems apparent to people why this is not something useful, why these types of modes of thinking about things will not yield useful information for you, neither in mathematics nor in their applications in real life, but somehow or another, this is the way people think about. This is the way people think about the nature of the universe itself. Which is investigated. All things are the subject of Ilm al-Kalam. Ilm al-Kalam investigates and talks about all things in a way to demonstrate the aqaid of Islam and their integrity in all things. So, لو حدثت لنفسها الأكوان لاجتمع التساوي ورجحان وذا محال. Said if the creation caused itself to be, that would entail the conjoining of an equivalence and a preponderance, right? So the creation is the creation, but it's also the creator at the same time. It's the subject of itself. It's the subject and the object both at the same time. It doesn't work that way. And this is, what I tell our Christian neighbors, many of them were on very, very friendly terms with them. They say, well, why don't you believe Jesus is the Son of God? They're like, do you believe in Jesus? I say, yeah, we revere Christ and we say that alayhi salam, that he's a prophet of God and that what he came with is truth and that his reverence and love is a necessary part and parcel without which faith is not valid and is not accepted. So what do you say, he's the Son of God? They say, no, of course we don't say he's the Son of God. Well, why don't you say he's the Son of God? I go, look, he's a human being. He walked around on the earth. He walked around in the universe, right? Yes. I go, how can he create himself? If he is the creator, how can he also be the object of the creation itself? Have you ever seen a table that is also the carpenter that made it itself? It doesn't work that way. There's no mithal for it. And usually at that point, many Christians will they'll shut down. They're like, well, I believe it though. I believe it is 100% true. I go, I'm not doubting that you believe it. I'm just saying, can you explain it to me? Otherwise, as much as you are very fervent about your beliefs, you have to excuse me for not accepting something that doesn't make sense to me. If it's something that you have some sort of ideological commitment to because of some emotional attachment or because you were born in a family, that's fine. It's not fine as in I'm saying it's okay and you'll be saved on the day of judgment, but I'm just saying I understand how that mechanism works amongst human beings psychologically, but I don't even have that. So if you want me to accept it, it has to make sense. If it's not going to make sense, how am I going to accept it? In that sense, I can make that appeal as well for everything I believe in, everything that I do, and you're not going to accept it either. Rationality, and this is one of the things about logic and rationality in particular, is that this is a common language between people. This is a common way of communicating between people, that people are different colors, people are of different dispositions, they follow different religions, they have different assumptions about the world, they have different experiences about the world. Somebody's mommy and daddy were nice to them when they were kids, somebody's mommy and daddy were mean to them when they were kids, somebody didn't even know who their mom was or who their dad was, somebody, all these things have all these radical effects on a person, how that person turns out and how they view the world and how they negotiate with the world around them. Someone's short, someone's tall, someone's strong, someone's weak, someone's smart, someone's dumb. All these things, they have a radical effect on a person. Rationality is one of those things theoretically that everyone should agree on. We should be able to agree upon. It's like the marketplace in which ideas can be exchanged and bartered with one another and valued against one another. So in that sense, with all love and respect, it makes no sense whatsoever. He said that if the creation created itself, then it's both the cause of its own existence while being its existence as well. This would entail a conjoining of equivalence and preponderance. That is both creation and it's creating itself without muhal. This is rationally impossible. It doesn't work. That something is itself creating itself. That the wujud needs all the wujud of hawadith, of hadithat, requires some muhdith. It requires something to cause it to exist. And so, to take this, example that the atheists often say, well, who created God, right? To take that question to a kind of like it's like full extent. That, okay, are you proposing that the buck doesn't stop anywhere? That it just keeps going backwards forever and ever and ever? How can you have any sort of empirical? Rationally, we already know it's dead on arrival. One of the clear signs that an argument is wrong, is fallacious, is a fallacy, is that it involves dawr and tasalsul. It involves dawr is what? Circular reasoning. Or that involves tasalsul, that it infinitely kicks the can down the road and it never arrives at any sort of answer. So this is okay, you keep asking this question, keep asking this question, keep asking this. Are you truly proposing that there's an infinite regress of causation in the universe, which itself is something, it's unacceptable and it's unprovable. It's just, again, pie in the sky in July. Well, they accuse Muslims and they accuse the people of religion of God being, wal-'iyadhu billah, their imaginary friend. This is your imaginary friend, that you think there's an infinite regress of things, or that somehow there's this like grand cyclical nature of the universe that infinitely goes in circles and circles. There's no way of proving something like that exists in the first place. And in general, this type of sensibility of infinite regress or cyclical reasoning, circular reasoning, this is how the old school OG atheists and kafir philosophers, what they used to settle on. This is the kufr of the Indic religions, whether it's the Vedic religions of Hinduism and its different manifestations. There's no one religion of Hinduism. Rather, the Muslims, when they came to India, they classified everybody as Hindu, but there were all these certain divergent religions with divergent gods and divergent philosophies and whatever that they believed in or didn't believe in, or said that we don't know anything and things are unknowable, all these different permutations of possibilities. So they just kind of made a taxonomic classification of them as Hinduism. And now, mashallah, there's like these whole political ideologies of like, we're proud of being Hindus and Hindu first and India for Hindus or whatever, but that really has no reality. It's a taxonomic classification. Or whether it be other Indic religions that are ancient as well, that are non-Vedic, like Buddhism, like Jainism, not related to our discussion, but Buddhism actually was the majority religion of the Indian subcontinent. It completely beat Hinduism out wherever Hinduism was. And it's because the Muslims conquered a Buddhist India that sent Buddhism into kind of a spiral politically in the Indian subcontinent that allowed Hinduism to, this Vedic type religions to be ascendant again. But the reason I'm mentioning all of these things is that all of them have this type of understanding that the universe is just cyclical. It just existed forever, and it's going to keep going through cycles forever and ever and ever. And this is why one of the reasons that many of these Indic religions, the highest aspiration a person can aspire to is to be liberated from the pointlessness of existence. The existence is just all this pointless suffering, and to be liberated from that is kind of the highest aspiration a person can aspire to. And it's all pointlessness. It's a model of everything being pointless. It's a model of, 1,000 vectors going in 1,000 different directions, all of which cancel one another out. And a model in which there's no such thing as reality, there's no such thing as truth, there's no such thing as falsehood. And these are actually things that they believe. There's a philosophical concept in Indic religions and Indic philosophies of Maya. Everything is just some sort of illusion, and of agnosticism that you can't really, or like a sophist level of agnosticism, that there's no actual such thing as truth. Nothing is real. So some of them say that there's no such thing as truth. Some of them say that, okay, there may be a truth out there, but it's completely unknowable. And some people say, well, you have your truth and I have my truth. All of this completely batil. There's a haqq and there's a batil. This it's completely false. 100% false. And people talk about all of these things. It's just sophistry. What is sophistry? In the old days, in Athens, there were philosophers for hire, like mercenary philosophers. So if you got into an argument with someone and you wanted them to help you win the argument, or you wanted to defame them in public, even if they might be kind of right or have a better argument, you hire a sophist and you'll put together your PR package and like smear your enemies and argue your point as if you have a point, even when you don't have any point. So all of this sophistry, the profession of sophists in modern society is basically been regularized in the practice of law. But so people like Alan Dershowitz or whatever will get up and argue kind of all this type of stupid stuff about the moral imperative of this and that and the other thing. The man spent half of his life on Epstein's island. He's probably higher up on the Mossad food chain than Epstein is. But, these are professional sophists. They'll get up and they'll make what seems like a very convincing argument until someone points out that the emperor has no clothes. Coming back to this idea, the idea that nothing is knowable. What is the natural consequent to that? Someone says, well, nothing is knowable. There's no such thing as truth, right? I say, okay, I'll punch you in the head and I'll take your wallet. I'm not actually saying someone should do that. I'm saying if I punch you in your head and take your wallet, what will you say? You'll scream, you'll say that hurts, and I'll be like, well, is there really such a thing as pain? Is there really such a thing as your wallet? Is stealing really wrong? Because everything, I don't like to think about things as like black and white, but there's like just different shades of gray. And I feel like we should all just get along. And yeah, what is it? It's tasawi, that the thief and the person who's been stolen from, the zalim and the mazlum, both of them are expected to sit down and be equals with one another. Or that there's no some sort of like rujhan between the two of them. This is complete nonsense. And this is what all of it leads to. And it's very interesting, right? This is one of the many gifts that Kalam gives you. When you believe in Allah, an average idiot thinks that believing in Allah Ta'ala and doing Allah Ta'ala some sort of favor by being pious or whatever. But hey, when you don't believe in Allah Ta'ala, the Satyanas is literally what happens. There's no reality to anything anymore. Nothing makes sense. Nothing, has any sort of like rhyme or reason to it. You yourself forget what does it mean to be happy. You forget what it means to be successful. This is the meaning of the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Don't be like those people who neglected Allah ta'ala, for He caused them to forget themselves. What is that? Like, people don't know what gender they are anymore. People don't want to have children anymore. People are eating things that are killing them. People are not taking care of themselves physically anymore. Those people are eating super, double, triple organic and exercising and working out. Their lives oftentimes are the most pointless. People are obsessed with like, oh, you live on this side of the imaginary line in the earth and I live on the other side, so I'm better than you, I'm worse than you. All of these stupid satanic nonsenses have co-opted and taken over the minds of people and the hearts and the souls of people and led to profound levels of unhappiness. Why? Because they cannot come to grips with this idea that there's some sort of haqq and that there's some sort of batil, which is the natural consequent to the God-given intellect and rational capability and faculty Allah Ta'ala gave every human being, even if they're illiterate people. So we continue. He says, وجوده له دليل قاطع. His existence has a decisive proof. حاجة كل محدث للصانع. The need for all ephemeral things to have a causal agent. لو حدثت لنفسها الأكوان لاجتمع التساوي والرجحان وذا محال. If the creation caused itself to exist, it existed always and it's just causing itself. One, A causes B, B causes C, and it just keeps cyclically going through all of these, either cyclically going through the same nonsense over and over again, or like just an infinite regress, an infinite chain of things that is initiated and never end, will never end, and was never initiated, just kept going infinitely into the past. That would entail conjoining equivalence and preponderance. That the thing is itself the creator and it's itself the creation. That they're all at the same time they're creation, so they're equal, but something is the creator and something is the creation, so there's a priority between them and an equality between them at the same time. That's rationally impossible. It can't be both of them at the same time. وحدوث العالم من حدث الأعراض مع تلازمه. He said the proof that the universe is ephemeral. Someone says, how do I know that the earth didn't exist forever? How do I know that the sun didn't exist forever? How do I know that, the stars didn't exist forever? How do I know that the planets didn't exist forever? And the proof that the universe is ephemeral is gleaned from the ephemerality of its states. That all material things goes through different states. None of them have a permanent state. They all go through different states. And the knowledge that both the universe and its ephemeral states are inseparable. So even physical objects that are there, none of them, their states last forever. So we can deduce from that none of them were always there, or none of them are always going to be there. Now this is one of those things I feel like in the past it was, maybe someone might think this is somewhat of a stretch, but nowadays with the knowledge of astronomy that we have, it's not a stretch at all. So when they say, for example, Imam Ghazali refuted the philosophers, he's not refuting, rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, he's not refuting philosophy in the literal linguistic sense of the word, the love of wisdom. Loving wisdom is haram, and so I'm refuting everyone who loves wisdom. That's obviously dumb. To hate wisdom is kufr. Allah Ta'ala himself is al-Hakim. But that's not what he was doing, even though people make it out to be that's what he's doing. Usually people who don't read, especially can't read Arabic, but even people who can read oftentimes are too lazy to crack a book open, so that's what they think is going on here. The refutation of the philosophers was a particular school of philosophy, the peripatetic school of philosophy, basically the Greek philosophers who wrote the Ilm al-Kalam to defend the worldview of the ancient Greek thinkers, which we 100% don't subscribe to, and is filled with all kinds of batil nonsense. Batil meaning not just from a shari'i point of view, although definitely from a shari'i point of view as well, but even from a rational point of view. All this just kind of like nonsense. Even from an empirical point of view, all this nonsense. So they believe that the universe existed forever, and that everything that's above the earth, further than the moon, between the earth and the moon, things keep changing. Everything outside of the moon is perfect and eternal. So they saw the way that the sun moves, they saw the way that the moon moves, they saw the way that the planets move, and they deduced that the earth is the center of the universe. And this is something that was by and large drank up and lapped up by the Christians, who then tried to give their own kind of Christian justification for it afterward, which led to them excommunicating Galileo for not saying that the sun was the center of the universe and all this other kind of weird stuff, right? So they said that the universe is perfect outside anything higher up from the moon. The moon is obviously the closest of the celestial bodies. So from the moon on down, everything is kind of changing and corruptible and can spoil. Everything above it is all perfect, and it moves in one perfect motion. It looks like it's moving, but it's just one perfect motion. Everything is actually perfect and stable and eternal. And we know that's not the case anymore. We know that the universe, the known universe itself, has a distinct beginning point. We know that the sun, there was a time the sun didn't exist, and the matter that makes up the universe is almost certainly the the result of another star that suffered collapse, supernova, because the Earth is not made out of just hydrogen. It's made up of like other heavier elements that can only seem to come into existence when a star dies a death, when it burns out and starts collapsing on itself and goes through phases of like electron degeneracy and all this other stuff. We know that even the order within the solar system wasn't permanent. At some point or another, the giant planets orbited the sun as close as the Earth and Venus and Mars now orbit it. And it's quite possible that one of the reasons that Mars and Earth and Venus are not as big as they are is because the giant planets came in and ate up a bunch of the matter that was in the inner ring of the solar system. And had they not migrated out as well, they would have eaten up the entire Earth and Venus and Mars and whatnot as well. So we know that none of this stuff is permanent. This idea somehow or another, all of this is permanent, that day will turn into night indefinitely, and it just is what it is, and it will keep going on like that forever. This is a big cope. 100% like the frog, with the gas mask meme, and it's the tank says copium on it. 100% big time cope of kufr and of kafirs. This idea that anything is permanent, everything is ephemeral. So what did, and I don't know that Mayara was that astronomically knowledgeable, because they didn't have the instruments to know that back then, or Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari or any of the other mutakallimun, or for that matter even the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But all of the knowledge comes from revelation, and the word of Allah Ta'ala and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is haqq. And so this is the muqtada of what the teachings of deen are. He says, وَحُدُوثُ الْعَالَمِ مِنْ حَدْثِ الْأَعْرَاضِ مَعْ تَلَازُمِ. He says that the proof that the universe is ephemeral, is temporary, is constantly changing, is gleaned from the ephemerality of the states of its matter, with the knowledge that both the universe and the ephemeral states of matter are inseparable. The temporary nature of its states, of every state that's there. Hot things become cold. Things that are fast slow down. Things happen. Nothing is the same forever, ever. And so the ephemerality of the states of things in the universe, with the knowledge that ephemeral nature of states is inseparable from matter, this is a proof that the entire universe is hadith. There's nothing that's qadim in the universe. So even like those old philosophers, those peripatetic philosophers, Hindu philosophers that thought the sun, moon, stars, all these things are permanent, they're not permanent at all. A day will come, every one of those stars is going to be effaced. برق البصر وخسف القمر وجمع الشمس والقمر يقول الإنسان يومئذ أين المفر. That when the sun and moon collide into each other, a person will say, where do I run now? Now, one might theorize that the day that the sun and moon actually collide, the amount of physical stress on everything on the earth will have long ago been so much that nothing can have survived it. But even just to theorize the idea that something like this is going to have such a cataclysmic event will happen one day, a person says, like, where are we going to run to? And this is إِذَا السَّمَاءُ انْفَطَرَتْ وَإِذَا الْكَوَاكِبُ انْتَثَرَتْ وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ فُجِّرَتْ. This is all the first surahs of Revelation are all pointing out to the fact that this universe is not going to be around forever. There are certain things that have regularity in them, the alternation of day and night, and the kullun fi falakin yasbahun, the orbits of the stars or whatever. They have some order and some structure in them that lead us to think about order and structure. But the idea is that order and structure that we're seeking through seeing these things that have a temporary order in which we find beauty and comfort, that's only really actually found in Allah Ta'ala. It's not found in anything else at all. And so, the accepting of the universe as hadith, as being ephemeral, temporary, and attributing qidam only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is rationally inescapable for any thinking person. لو لم يكن قدمه وصفه لازم حدوثه دور تسلسل حتم. So if primordial pre-existence, qidam, the idea that He created time and that He has priority over time. He created time rather than the idea that he somehow exists within it. If his primordial pre-existence, his priority over time in space was not an attribute of his, it would necessitate circularity and infinite regress. If you were to say that, okay, he existed forever, but he existed within time, that would mean necessarily that there's some sort of like infinite time in the past. And that's not something that's rationally bearable. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And, again, right now we're just talking about the proofs of those rationally necessary attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that don't require recourse to revelation in order to understand. But there were some who argued that the universe existed forever, that attributed themselves to Islam and Muslims, and we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maybe they just didn't understand this bab properly, and that He forgives them if their intentions were good. It's very clear that the worldview that Islam imparts is one that says everything has a finite beginning. Nothing existed forever. There are 3 sahih riwayat. كان الله ولم يكن قبله شيء كان الله ولم يكن معه شيء كان الله ولم يكن غيره شيء. You'll find it in Bukhari that Allah was, there was a time in which Allah was, and there was nothing before Him. There was a time Allah was, and there was nothing with Him. These are 3 different riwayat. Then there's a time that Allah was, and there was nothing other than Him. All 3 of them are sahih riwayat. So what can Allah means Allah existed, not there's a time that Allah was, but Allah existed. And there was nothing with Him, there was nothing other than Him, there was nothing before Him. So there's nothing that has chronology within time before Him or priority before Him. And there's an existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that doesn't have anything other than Him with it or anything with Him in it. With Him meaning that He caused that thing to exist with Him in that state, or that something else existed other than Him without His permission. And this is very, very clear. It is very clear. This understanding is very clear. Allah Ta'ala has the name Al-Badi'. He's the originator. Allah Ta'ala originated all things. That everything has an origin. But Allah Ta'ala Himself doesn't have an origin. Allah Ta'ala is Allah. And He's Qadim. And His Qidam necessitates what? That we say He has no origin, He just always was. His existence is rationally necessary, and it transcends the idea of sequentiality and chronology or ordering in space. Now, this is a rule in logic that you can remember that will give you some help in thinking through these things and understanding ilm al-kalam. That everything that its non-existence is impossible, its qidam is necessary. So Allah Ta'ala's non-existence is impossible. That means He must have always been there in a way that transcends time. Jais things that are rationally possible, their existence is confined to time and space. But things that their existence is necessary, they must necessarily be transcendent above time and space. Why? Because time and space imply ephemerality. Something that's rationally necessary, it must transcend ephemerality. كلما استحالوا عدمه وجب قدمه كلما وجب قدمه استحال عدمه. So Ibn ʿāshir says again in his versification of Sanusi's curriculum on kalam, he said, if primordial pre-existence wasn't his attribute, it would have necessitated circularity and infinite regress, or infinite regress. Circularity, how? That somehow or another the universe, one thing creates the other, and then the other thing creates the one thing creates the other thing creates the one thing. Like, this is the kind of like emergency blanket that materialists cling to. They say, oh, well, the Big Bang doesn't necessarily mean the universe has a beginning. Maybe there's a big crunch at the end of it and it just cyclically bang, crunch, bang, crunch, bang, crunch, which is a very, it sounds almost indecent actually when you put it that way, doesn't it? But yeah, there's no empirical data that will prove that this is something that's happening, and it's just this kind of cope, because again, circular reasoning is not something that people of reason accept, or tasalsul, that there's just an infinite regress of things happening in the world, that this caused that and that was caused by something else, that was caused by something else. It has no end whatsoever. That if Allah Ta'ala wasn't qadim, if He didn't transcend time and space, then there would have been no buck with which anything stopped. Everything just mindlessly exists just because it exists, even though nothing exists just because everything has a cause. But we would say that that there is no original cause, that preceding causes exist just because they exist, not because something's making them happen. Which is, the idea, the imagination that there's an effect without a cause. If it was possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't exist in the future, it would have meant that He was also not qadim. If He was always around, but at some point in the future He won't be around, remember the rule that we mentioned is that everything that it's impossible for it not to exist, it must be qadim. Why? Because in the future, if Allah Ta'ala didn't exist, wal-iyadu billah, or if the necessary existence wasn't existent in the future, then it would have meant that it was mumkin, that it was possible, which would have meant that it itself was an ephemeral thing, that it must have a beginning. If it can have an end, it must have a beginning as well, and it needs to have a cause, because what makes it exist in the future stops making it what made it exist in the past stops making it exist in the future, and that implies there's a cause even further up the line from its existence. لو ماثل الخلق حدوثهن حتم, that if He resembled the creation, it would necessitate His ephemerality. Again, if He resembled the creation, all creations are affected by causes, and all of the creation is constantly changing. So if He resembled the creation in any way, shape, or form, if He was subject to time and space, it would it would necessitate His ephemerality. If He had a body, if He was contained in time, if He was contained in space, if He had anything that was like the creation, then He can't be qadim. لو لم يكن وصف الغنى له افتقر. If freedom from need wasn't His attribute, He would have been contingent. If He wasn't one, He wouldn't be omnipotent. لو لم يكن بواحد لما قدر. So if he had no freedom from need, He would have been contingent. If He needs something, that means that thing will do something that will cause Him to be who He is. And the fact that contingency is there, it negates the possibility of qidam, because we're saying that Allah Ta'ala's wujub is wajib. Allah Ta'ala's wujud is wajib. Allah Ta'ala's existence is necessary. So if it was contingent on anything, then it wouldn't be necessary, rather it would have been contingent. لو لم يكن بواحد لما قدر. If He was not one, He would not have been omnipotent. What does that mean? If there are two gods together, Allah Ta'ala says this in His book as well, right? What does Allah Ta'ala say? He says it in so many places in His book. He says, Jalla wa Ala, He says, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا فسبحان الله رب العرش عما يصفون. Had there been in the heavens and the earth gods other than Allah, they would have been spoiled. So exalted is Allah, above blemish, the Lord of the throne, above all of the wrong things that the people of error describe Him with. Allah Ta'ala says in His book, He says, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعْهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ. Allah Ta'ala never took a son, nor was there any God with him. إِذَا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ سُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ. So Allah Ta'ala didn't take a son, nor is there any God other than him. If such had been the case, each God would have gone in its own direction with what it created, and some of them would vie to have supremacy over others. And exalted is Allah above the defects that human beings describe him or attribute to him or describe him with. The point is what? Is that if Allah Ta'ala wasn't one, there's more than one God, they would have either been exactly the same or they would have been different. If they're exactly the same, then it's identity. It's like 1 equals 1. So if they're exactly the same and the object of their omnipotence is exactly the same, then it's the same. It's not two gods, it's one. If they're exactly the same, but the object of their omnipotence is half of the creation on this side and half of the creation on the other side, or maybe 60-40, I don't know. Then what would happen is that a person, one of the gods would be 60% omnipotent and the other one would be 40%, because there would be a place in existence that exists to which their omnipotence doesn't extend. And if they were different, you would have seen one set of things happening in one place and one set of things happening in the other place. And so we say, no, Allah Ta'ala is one. Allah Ta'ala is one, and the proof of Allah Ta'ala's oneness is in the creation is the uniformity of norms, of adi, of observable norms in the creation throughout all of it, of really rational norms throughout all of it. And if Allah Ta'ala was somehow separable into like these different parts, if they're all exactly the same and the muqtada, the consequence of his actions are exactly the same, then those parts are not, I mean, they're not different than one another. And you have to understand, like, think about what does this mean that they're like exactly like, imagine two, don't imagine because it's not imaginable, but the point is the idea that someone would say that maybe there's two gods that are qadim, that transcend time and space. What does it even mean to be two different things in a place where space doesn't exist and when time doesn't exist? Like those things, the meanings of them break down. Why? Because separability and the idea of experiencing things being different, all of this is part of huduth. Whereas with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason it's oneness is because there's, you know, the separability of all things are part of being ephemeral. And so a person can only, even imagine that there's two different gods in the Greek mythology, Hindu mythology sense of what a god is. That there are two superpowers, maybe they're physically really big and they like fly in space and can morph into different things and do like X-Men type of feats or whatever, and they fight with one another. But those are all hadith, that's all huduth, all of that is still huduth, none of it comes to the point of qidam. All of it is mumathala, all of it is within time and within space. The idea of being the originator of time and space, being beyond the mumathala of the creation, that idea, in that realm, multiplicity doesn't really have any meaning anymore, does it? It's just that there's wujub of wujud at that point, and it's beyond the grasp of created things. لو لم يكن حيا مريدا عالما وقادرا لما رأيت عالما. So if Allah Ta'ala wasn't living, possessing will, knowledge and omnipotence, you would not have seen a universe. Meaning what? In order to create a universe, the ability to create must be there, first of all. Second of all, because the universe is differentiated, because it's not just one like complete soup of matter that's all the same, because the universe is differentiated, it requires a will. It requires some sort of tarjih for things coming out and existing in the particular way they exist, even though there are all these other possibilities. And it requires, the ability to have a will to affect all of these things require knowledge. So the qudra, irada, and ilm of Allah Ta'ala, all of these things are proven by the fact that the universe exists in the particular order that it exists in, that we see. And the order of the universe is like magnificent. It's something that's like glorious to behold, in the smallest of things and the largest of things. And a person would be a fool to think that all of this order is there, even though we know the nature of matter itself is ephemerality, and that's not something you have to learn from a mutakallim. The laws of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is entropy, that all things are constantly and spontaneously move from order to decay. It's a reality that we know about the universe around us. Yet, you see so much order in the universe. To say that there's no being, there's no entity, there's no cause that caused the order to be there in the first place is again it begs the question of then where did it come from? And if it just happened on its own, it's tarjih bila murajjih. It's saying that something it was made to be without some agent making it be, which doesn't exist in the world. Everything has some sort of agent, whether it's in the physical world or otherwise. وَالتَّالِي فِي السِّتِّ الْقَضَايَا بَاطِلُ قَطْعًا مُقَدَّمٌ إِذًا مُمَاثِلُ. The consequence of the above 6 propositions, which are the negation of omnipotence, of knowledge, of life, of will, of oneness, and of need. The consequence of these 3 propositions are decisively fallacious, that the result of it is something that makes it clear that it doesn't make sense, it's irrational. Therefore their antecedents, meaning those 6 propositions, are likewise fallacious. وَالسَّمْعُ وَالْبَصَرُ وَالْكَلَامُ بِالنَّقْلِ مَعَ كَمَالِهِ تُرَامُ. And so he says, Sanusi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that as for the sama', as for the hearing of the hearing and the basar, the vision and the kalam, speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said that the ulama they debated these things from before. Are these really something rationally necessary for a person to come to the conclusion that they exist, or are they things that through revelation they're properly known? Now the fact that the question is even answered means that their best knowledge is only going to be there through revelation. And maybe somebody who was saying that they should be known from just through a rational process, they can then start to explain, that somehow the sama' of Allah Ta'ala, obviously it's not like that of the creation. The basar of Allah Ta'ala, the hearing and vision of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala are not like the vision of the creation, but somehow or another, for example, having knowledge something happened is different than having seen it happen. It's different than having heard it happen. As a human being, there are levels of experience that are involved in them that are different. And so, perhaps they're saying that, that we have this idea of the experiential process yields a different type of knowledge with regards to a certain act. So all of those levels are encompassed within the ilm of Allah Ta'ala. Allah knows best. But we'll leave those things, inshallah, for the student to advance and read them in their particular chapters in which they're discussed in the longer works. But we'll say that these 3 are mentioned oftentimes in the list of 13 attributes, but there's some discussion back and forth with regards to them. This is evidence of his hearing, vision, and speech are to be sought in revelation, as well as rational consequence to his perfection. that they're a rational consequence to His perfection, that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has perfection through understanding the previous all-encompassing nature of His attributes that are known through the rational process. So they can be rational consequence to His perfection, but their real evidence may be found in the revelation and not something that can be deduced purely from a rational process. And finally it says, لو استحال ممكن أو وجب قلب الحقائق لزوما أوجب. He says, if rational possibility became impossible for, because what did we say? We said that when it comes to rationally possible things, He has the ability to do all of them or none of them or anything in between. He said, if that wasn't true, so now we're trying to prove it through logic. He said, if a rational possibility became impossible or necessary, that would entail the necessary overthrow of reality. Meaning what? Something is either necessary, impossible, or possible. If you were to say that there's something from possibilities that He can't do, then that means it's possible and impossible at the same time. If they're saying there's something that is possible that He must do, that means it's possible and necessary at the same time, which is all of its fallacy. It's, all of it is can only make sense if nothing else makes sense, and it's a breakdown of reality itself, which means it's rationally impossible. So he must, by definition, be able to do all those things that are rationally impossible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. The point of all of these things is to understand what the vastness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and what the greatness of Allah ta'ala is, and how when we say He's not like the creation, it doesn't just mean that He's like bigger or that He's louder or that He's stronger, but He really qualitatively leaves the creation behind in such a way that Allah ta'ala is truly laysa kamithlihi shay. And I found nobody who was able to explain the transcendent reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how truly overwhelming it is in a way that engages the mind more than the mutakallimun. And so for that reason I make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raise their rank, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honor them in this world and in the hereafter, and may we also benefit from this. Again, the ilm al-kalam is the primary beneficiary of aqidah in general is what? It's us ourselves, so that we can know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we can help us navigate the path toward Him in our journey. Yes, some of the ulama are by necessity going to have to argue with the people of falsehood, but if that's what a person thinks of this as primarily, then they're kind of missing the point. They're getting a small benefit and they're missing the huge one. That a person should think about these things, ponder over these things, and ponder over these sifat of Allah Ta'ala when looking at the creation, that this could not have happened on its own, and that it could not have happened internally. It must have been seeded by transcendent power. A person should have that reality enter into their heart to the point where they know there's no other way it could have been. It's Allah made it, and it couldn't have been any other way. There's no sun and star that burns bright enough, and there's no planet that is habitable enough, and there is no matter that is gross enough, not in the like ew gross, but in the like great sense of greatness, nor energy that is has some sort of indescribable power that could have done all of this. Rather, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's qualitatively unlike His creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on us. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala rasulihi sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.